Hello and welcome to Shoot the Hostage with me, Dan, and my partner, Sarah. We're a movie podcast who talks about a different film each week based on a theme. We do swear and we do spoil the featured movie, so only ever listen if you've seen the film or you don't care too much about spoilers. If you're a regular listener, you can just skip forward until you hear the intro music because you've heard all of this before. But if you are new to the show and you do enjoy what you hear, there are a couple of things you can do to help support the show. Firstly, make sure that you're subscribed on your podcast player so you get notified when new shows drop on Mondays. You could rate us 5 stars on Spotify, which couldn't be easier. You just hit the star icon below the show's artwork. Or if you have a spare few minutes, we'd love it if you could submit a review wherever you listen. Make sure you come follow us at STH_pod on social media. We are active on Instagram, X, Threads, and TikTok. And lastly, the biggest thing you can do to help is tell a friend about the show. So that's about it. That's enough preamble from me. Over to me and Sarah for this week's episode. Okay, we are continuing our neo-western season, and we're continuing it with a bizarre movie called The Way of the Gun from 2000, directed and written by Christopher McQuarrie. We've got some help today. We've got Chris Regan from Just a Thing podcast.
Hello.
Hello, Chris. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for persevering through all of the mountains of technical errors that we've had today. So it looks like a full 40 minutes of trying to figure out what microphones are where and how we can hear each other.
That's fine. It's working now, so that's the main thing.
That's the main thing, yeah. Well, firstly, thank you very much for coming on.
That's all right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. A huge fan of Just a Thing. I love it. I think it's a really great podcast. So I really enjoy the things that you and Joel talk about.
Thank you.
I was super happy to be a guest on your show a few months ago to talk about Dark Blue.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was a good episode. Yeah, that's also quite a bizarre film.
Yeah, do you know what? I kind of thought about that movie while we were watching this one, because obviously I knew that we were going to record together. But I did sort of think that as well. There were a few sort of jarring moments in that movie. It's not as bizarre as this movie, but there's definitely some crossover there. I don't know if McQuarrie and Ayer have got some kind of edgelord pact or something, or agreement that they've entered into.
Yes. That's where the crossover is, yes. They're definitely both edgelords.
I'm glad we agree on that.
Yeah. When I sent you the list, the lineup, I was kind of hoping you would choose this one because I just think there's quite a lot to get into.
Yeah.
I guess my first question is, well, firstly, why did you choose this one? And what's your kind of first experience with this movie?
I do the second part first, though. I remember I didn't see it at the cinema. I was a huge Usual Suspects fan, which I haven't gone back to in years, and it's sort of, I don't know how I feel about it these days, Usual Suspects, but it's because you've got I don't know if you want to get into it, but you've got the double thing of Spacey and Singer, both problematic characters now. I'm not sure how in some ways I'd rather just have my memory of it being amazing. So, but certainly when Usual Suspects came out, I was obsessed with it. That was one of those films I used to just whenever any of my friends came around, because I guess I was a teenager at the time, would be like, we've got to watch this, and I'd sit and watch their reactions to it in that annoying sort of way that film fans would do. But yeah, so I was obsessed with that film, and then I knew that Chris McQuarrie had made this one, but for some reason I missed it at the cinema. I guess I was at uni, so I think my brother had it on DVD. So yeah, the first time I watched it was on DVD, and I don't know if this is, I mean, it is valid because it's how I feel, but like it's sort of a weird way to experience the film, because I wasn't that impressed when I first watched it. I was like, I don't really understand what that was about, and then I listened to the director's commentary, and I suddenly was like got it, and I was like, oh, I understand. Okay, I sort of didn't give this the time maybe that it deserved, and I sort of watched it again a couple of years later, and was like, with that extra knowledge, I've sort of really enjoyed it. And then it's one of those things I've gone back to every now and again, and seeing it now, I think I loved it even more, even though obviously some parts of it are perhaps more problematic than they used to be. But,
we'll definitely get into that.
Yes, but I think what it is and what I like about it is, what I like kind of failed experiments in a way. I don't think it entirely works. I think it is sort of highly flawed, but I do think that he tried something really ambitious and quite sort of subversive in a way as a reaction to the way he found sort of being treated as an indie filmmaker, and which I can kind of relate to more now. But I think that's what I sort of like about it. There's a sort of punk aesthetic to it, not necessarily in the film itself, but in his approach to it, I suppose. I like it when people are able to do something that maybe isn't structurally or like in terms of the format the best, what we would acknowledge as a great film, but they just tried something a bit bizarre and a bit sort of out there, and whether it worked or not, it exists in that form. And it's sort of what they wanted to do, because that's so what I appreciate about it is that's so hard to do, and it's so hard to, especially when there's money involved, to make a film and sort of stick to your guns like that in that way, and sort of have a vision and go, this is what I want to do, and it's not the norm, is quite difficult. So yeah, I think that's what I appreciate about it, and I think that's why it's an interesting film to talk about.
Yeah, he definitely took some big swings. I'll give him that.
Yeah.
Yeah, some huge swings. And I first saw this film in 2000 when it was released at the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a Sunday night, I remember it very well. And I was just absolutely blown away by it. I loved it. I was 16 years old.
Oh, cool.
It had everything in it that I wanted. And then I kind of didn't think about it again. It was in the back of my mind, but it was, there was that brilliant film you saw years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then the most recent time, apart from this time when we watched it for the podcast, I watched it in 2020. And I watched it and I had a very bizarre reaction, because it was just, I don't know, there was some really tricky, problematic stuff in it, particularly at the beginning of the film. It does tone down a little bit after that.
Yeah.
And I just was like, what's this? What is this? And, it made me question what happened in the 90s.
Drugs, lots of drugs.
But like you say, when you watch the commentary, and McQuarrie is one of these people. I mean, you're not short on Christopher McQuarrie commentaries, and he's everywhere on podcasts talking about his process and the things that he makes. So there's quite a lot of insight that he's brought to it, and particularly with the commentary. And you do sort of view it through a slightly different lens. I keep saying it, but it's an interesting movie. It doesn't entirely work for me now. I do like it still. I still really enjoy it, but there's some stuff in it that I'm just like, I just can't get past it. It feels a little bit like, well, I think he had some issues trying to get something made after The Usual Suspects.
Yeah.
Is what I've heard him say.
Why was that?
Essentially, the issue was that he didn't want to do the same thing again. So he was trying to get an Alexander the Great film made. Like, he wanted to do something completely different.
Okay.
And he didn't want to do a crime film. And this is exactly what I sort of relate to when he's talking about it, is that the people with money in films are quite short-sighted, and if they see you've done one thing successfully, then they just want you to do that again. So all he could get was jobs doing other crime films. They wanted him to do Usual Suspects again, but within that, he was also finding it was quite he was quite restricted in what he could do. Like, he couldn't even do Usual Suspects again, because you're expected to. The things he was railing against were the sort of the way criminals and the way characters are portrayed in Hollywood, particularly at that time, where you have to have, and I mean, it's sort of, I don't know if have you read Save the Cat, the screenwriting book?
Yeah.
Long time ago, but yeah.
To summarize, Save the Cat is this idea. The idea of the book is that if you have a character and you have them saving a cat or doing something at the beginning, then you will sympathize with them, and then you can follow them doing whatever they want to do because they are sympathetic characters. So he was writing these crime films, and people were saying, well, the characters aren't sympathetic enough, and he was getting to arguments and eventually getting kicked off a lot of projects. So he comes at this film going, well, I don't want sympathetic characters. I want the audience to hate the two main characters.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the beginning, the opening of the film.
Otherwise known as the punch the cat trope.
Yeah.
Yes. Had you seen it before, Sarah?
No. I saw it for the first time about 4 days ago.
What did I think I said to you a few times, it's bizarre, it's
Yeah.
interesting, we'll have a good chat about it. It's
You-
bizarre. Don't forget, by the way, it's bizarre.
You didn't emphasize that enough.
No.
Yeah, that must be weird saying it. Yeah, with that, because I think it is of its time.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I didn't dislike it, but I have some opinions, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean the two really difficult bits that stood out for me, and it is it. So the opening, it starts with, so it's Ryan Philippe and Benicio del Toro, and they're coming out of a club. I love the way it opens, because it opens with them. They're just in the corner of the shot. You don't even really focus on them, and they're just there. And they get into a fight with a guy, and his girlfriend, who's Sarah Silverman, is sort of provokes this fight. And the way they get out of this is, I shouldn't really laugh, is they punch her, and then Benicio del Toro also randomly punches another woman, and kisses another woman. So there's the whole there's a double assault going on, and then they get beaten up. And so that's your introduction to the main characters. And then they there's this voiceover that explains that they kind of how they get by mostly donating sperm and blood. Cuts them in a sperm bank, and you then get this, and this is the bit, because I'd remembered the punching bit, and I knew I was prepared for that, because I remembered that happening. I'd forgotten the massive homophobic rant that Ryan Phillippe does, and I was like, that was jarring. I think that's the bit that's even. I mean, none of it's okay, and it's not supposed to be okay, because this is the thing: it is supposed to be repulsive. All of it is supposed to be. You're not supposed to be on this character, but that's so hard to watch, and we're so used to not having that. But I think the homophobic rant bit, I think that feels more like I feel like there was a point, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, where there would be, and it used to be sort of more kind of racism, but you'd have a racist rant. I'm sure there was sort of bits in Tarantino films that were now you go back to and go, is this okay? I'm not sure that we used to think it was, but it is that edgelord thing where at the time you were oh wow, this is so edgy, and they're not really racist, but it's this sort of, and again, I suspect, I would hope that Christopher McQuarrie is not homophobic, but it's just right. In a way, it was really disappointing that in the commentary he doesn't really talk about the big rant that Ryan Phillippe does at all. He just sort of he talks about it in the. Oh, the only thing he mentions about it is that he wrote it for another actor. He had another actor in mind when he does it. But it's such a weird, I don't know, it's such a weird kind of nasty moment.
I appreciate that he's trying to set up these despicable characters as some kind of rebellion against films that, or maybe comments and notes that he was probably getting from studios, we can't sympathise with this character, so he's like, sod it, I'm going to just make these people as horrible as possible. So the first scene, I think there's probably a different way to do it, but then when it gets to where he goes on a massive homophobic rant, I'm just kind of like, what's the point of this scene? Because we've already done the first one when I already hate these guys, so why are we doing this bit? And I think the sort of language that they use is the sort of language that was quite common in the 80s and 90s in film and stuff, but not to this extent. It's like you had the odd word in Bill and Ted, for example, or any kind of films like that, but
this was a very concentrated number of F slurs in a very small amount of time.
It was relentless.
Yeah.
And I didn't really get what the purpose of that one was, because even I think logically within the story, they were there to get paid, right? So why are they trying to annoy this doctor?
It doesn't make any sense. And I don't know, I mean, this is a tangent, I don't even know if I want to go into it, but and I've always wondered this, and again, I don't know if it's there at all, but is there a reading of this film where those two characters are gay? Because there's no sort of romantic part of the film, particularly. And I don't want to be like, oh, just because there's two men and they're doing a thing that they must be gay, but they sort of share this life together where they sort of travel around, sort of, I guess, sleeping in their car and stuff. It sort of seemed, because that was the only way I could possibly sort of get on the same page. It's as if that came from, maybe he's writing Parker's character as a closeted homosexual, and that this is sort of, I don't know, it
Some
somehow
sort
came
of
from that, or because
internalized homophobia.
yeah, or because he knows, or because he's gay, that he's sort of like playing with the guy. I don't know. You can't really. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know. Probably it was just him trying to be edgy, and I'm trying to read too much into it in a way of because the problem with moments like that is it makes it so like, and I find this with so many kind of like 90s and 2000s films, is I get to a point where I'm like, I can't really recommend that to film 21 anymore because you have to recommend it with the caveat that like, okay, there's this pretty brutal bit at the beginning that's not okay, and then there's this really homophobic rant, but if you get past that, then it's smooth sailing from there, and then it's a great film. So it does make it difficult, but which is why it's such a strange choice.
I do like your read on it. I like that theory.
Yeah, maybe that's how I'll sort of be okay with it myself.
Yeah, that's canon now. We've decided.
I think we need to watch it again
with that
assumption, with that in mind, and see if it plays slightly differently.
Yeah,
it is interesting. I hadn't thought of it, and now I'm thinking, yeah, actually, that does.
Yeah, that tracks.
Yeah,
I like it,
and it works. It works on two levels, because any time there's a suggestion that because they kidnapped Juliette Lewis, anytime there's a suggestion that Ryan Phillippe and Juliette Lewis are sort of getting, not even, like, again, it's not romantic, but anytime there's any sort of connection building between them, Del Toro shuts it down. Like, he always is in there like, no, you can't do this, or he's like gives them, most of the time, because he's so great, he just gives them a look, and he's like shuts it down. And I think that sort of that plays into it as well. But again, you can also, that works on the plot level, that he's like, we need to not be getting close to this person. So
I would say McQuarrie is a very smart filmmaker. He does know what he's doing. He does know how to like structure scenes, and when you think of like his more recent work with Mission Impossible and stuff, that they are they are above average action films. Like you can watch a scene and there's kind of multiple layers to the scene maybe, and the dialogue's quite good and snappy and a bit sarcastic or but just clever. So there's definitely more to it, but I'm amazed that he's never addressed that at all either. And I was kind of hoping he was going to address some of the stuff that he didn't in the commentary. When
was the commentary recorded?
At the time, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe if it was more recent, then he might have been more inclined to.
Yeah, I'd love to do a 20th anniversary or something.
Yeah. I mean, he comes across as quite bitter in the not in a bad way, but like because I think it didn't do well. I don't think they were happy with how it was marketed. I don't know if you watched the trailer on the DVD.
I did. I watched the trailer and I watched the actor. That there was like a 60-second, 90-second.
Yes.
Tay Diggs, why is this movie so great?
Oh no, that sounds cringe.
But the trailer is like it has a new metal soundtrack. Like, it opens with Limp Bizkit.
Oh,
and you're
no.
like, this is not a Limp Bizkit fan. I mean, like, no. I mean, and like, I'll hold my hands up. I'm a Limp Bizkit fan, but like, it's not appropriate. Like, you watch this trailer, and it's like, clearly they did not understand what to do with this film. Like, it's because you listen to because I love the soundtrack and the actual film,
amazing.
But rather than using that, they're just like, oh yeah, because it's 2000 and
who's popular?
We've got the so we'll just put like Limp Bizkit on it, and it's like, yeah, this doesn't even work. So yeah, I think McQuarrie was recording that quite soon afterwards, and they talk about how no one saw it and how it wasn't marketed properly, and so I don't think it's a film that even gets talked about very often. I wonder if there's a BuzzFeed article out there somewhere going, you'll never believe this speech in Christopher McQuarrie's film, like,
probably
trying to take him down. But like, yeah, it's sort of, I think it's such a non-entity, this film, in terms of its place in sort of cinematic history. I don't think he's ever had need to address it.
Yeah, but also I think it's really worth noting that it drives me up the wall when so many people kind of conflate a film portraying something as a film endorsing it.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to sort of go, well, he was trying to make these characters as detestable as possible. So as offensive as those first 5 minutes are, I mean, he achieved it. He achieved what he set out to do. They're vile. So I don't see that as him co-signing the behaviour, but I guess people would misread it that way.
Yeah, I would assume. I mean, I don't know for sure. I would assume he's not homophobic. I mean,
yeah, I would hope so.
He was really good friends with Bryan Singer. I mean, obviously Bryan Singer's a problematic character, but
the less said about him, the better.
I think as well. I'm sure the Stephen Baldwin character in Usual Suspects was coded as gay as well. I'm sure, like he sort of has a reference in there to a boyfriend or something. I mean, again, Stephen Baldwin, not a great sort of person, but anyway, that's that film. But there's also there is a tradition, and this is sort of its time too. But in crime books of characters not being like, I don't know if you've ever read any Jim Thompson. He did The Getaway, which was a Peckinpah film, and but Jim Thompson and Richard Starker did like Point Blank and stuff. Like they were famous for these characters who were criminals who acted like criminals. They were never nice people. They were all about the business of what they were doing. There's a Casey Affleck film where he plays a sheriff and he's horrible, and the name of it, I think it's Michael Winterbottom. I can't remember the name of the film, so that's useful. But that's based on a Jim Thompson novel, and it's that's his kind of archetype. Is these kind of really hideous, irredeemable characters, but they are the main characters in the book. And again, the Jim Thompson influenced Tarantino a lot, and you get some of that in a lot of his stuff. I think there were parallels between this and Reservoir Dogs, like the kind of, they have this very workman-like approach to the crimes, like Parker and Longbow when they're planning the crime, when they're doing the crimes, it's very like they have a system to it and rules, and it's not like all chaos and like shouting. Like there's a bit in the hospital when they kidnap Juliet. Well, they try to kidnap Juliet Lewis the first time, and when they sort of fail and they leave and they're taking turns, it's almost like military the way they leave the hospital, and it's clearly these aren't kind of amateur sort of, like this is their job, is this kind of stuff, and they're prepared for it, and I think that has a kind of literary history as well. I don't know where I started on this, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you got to that point, because my experience with it, I think that's when that happened, that's when I started to really kind of buy into the film. I'm talking about me as a 16-year-old and me as a 40-year-old. They're doing the kind of the tactical movements and the coordinated kind of movements into the building. Ryan Philippe's got is it a stocking on his head?
Tights,
to obscure his face, and Benicio del Toro is already behind them, and all of that stuff really gives me a sense of their. Well, it makes me think. Well, they're quite smart. They've worked out these best systems to use. They've definitely got some kind of training, whether that's they've had military training or whether they've just watched videos on, well, not YouTube back then, but
they're not new to this. They've got like a shared history.
And
now you've brought that up, actually, that's probably something that, obviously I didn't love this film, but that's one of the things that I did really enjoy about it. And I think it sort of speaks to the confidence of the script and the characterization, because in a lesser film there would have been a scene or some preamble to that where they do plan it out, and like Army of the Dead is a good example. That's just because it's in recent memory, but you have that whole scene where they're planning out the crime, and then you sort of see the imagined version of it before they pull it off, and it's just redundant. So I'm really glad that they don't kind of lower themselves to that in this.
And you don't need it, and particularly with you get a lot of a sense of their characters from their actions and what they're doing. But you mentioned Benicio del Toro earlier; he can say so much with just his face. I know that you're not the hugest fan of Ryan Philippe. Is it Philippe or Felipe? What are we
I'm
saying?
never sure.
I don't actually know. Because in the commentary they kept calling him Philippi. And I was like, no, I don't know at all.
I know you weren't a huge fan of his in this movie.
I'm not a huge fan of him in general. I don't think he's the worst actor ever. I think the fact that he looks like the sixth member of NSYNC is sort of a stumbling block to me taking him seriously. And from everything I've read, it's not just limited to me. That was kind of an obstacle that he did find in his career. People wanted him to be the leading man, and he sort of had to fight for this part.
He did. Yeah, he did have to fight for this part. But I didn't, outside of the stuff we've already talked about, I didn't really have a problem with him. And I actually think he's quite good. I think
I think he's good.
quite well. He does quite well in this. And I know McQuarrie was
Mm.
saying about how well he did with the training, and he really wanted a part. And I thought
Yeah.
that he did brilliantly. I don't love the voice stuff, but I do kind of acclimatize to that. It kind of feels like he's doing like a Brando or something. He's trying to do some kind of voice thing. I don't understand why.
I thought he was fine. I think my biggest problem is that he's sort of surrounded by people like Del Toro and James Caan, and like when you're, it's hard not to be overshadowed by people like that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think because one of the things that he said in the commentary was that Del Toro would just cut out chunks of dialogue and say, "I don't need all this." He could just do it. And there's that scene where Ryan Phillippe's doing his like he has a monologue at one point about like someone he killed, and Benicio del Toro just listening to this monologue is like, I don't think I've ever seen anyone listen as well. Like his reactions are just amazing, and there's so much going on, and he's not saying anything. And it's more interesting watching him react than listening to what Ryan Phillippe is saying. It's sort of, I think Del Toro is incredible in this film. I think he's sort of just really, really interesting to watch, and there's always stuff going on in his head, and he's never saying much, but there's always just so much going on with him. It's great.
I think maybe for me that is one of the strongest parts of this film is the cast. I wrote down all of the cast names and their character names, and it took me forever because I'll usually just write down the most notable characters, and that's probably a slight criticism of mine. Love the cast, I think they all do great, but I do think there's probably too many characters and maybe too much interconnectivity. I think maybe there's some comment there about nepotism in the industry, maybe that whether James Caan is related to Juliette Lewis's character and Herschel from The Walking Dead.
Scott Wilson.
Scott Wilson, his son plays the doctor as well, Dr. Alan Painter.
And Juliette Lewis's real dad was Jeffrey Lewis.
Yeah.
That I didn't know until 4 days ago, until I was researching. I had no idea.
I don't think I knew that, to be honest.
No, I didn't know that either. I was really surprised to hear that. But yeah, I know I had an issue with that, partly because I thought it was a lot of unnecessary information. The story is kind of interesting enough without all of this kind of soap opera characters and reveals of who's parents of who. And I don't know if it's explicitly stated that James Caan is the father of Robin, but
I think it's heavily implied.
Yeah,
it is, isn't it? And I had an issue with all of that because it was hard to keep track of, and I just thought, this is too much. I'm enjoying this already. This is too much. Give me less. But I've been thinking about it today, and I did wonder if, because of obviously a lot of this was a backlash to his trying to get a film made, and I wondered if it was a bit of, well, you know, the film industry is all about nepotism, so I'm going to put a bunch of that in my film, or a bunch of.
I think there's a bit of that. Yeah, but I also think because one of the things I really like about it is that everyone in the film, and maybe he does it too much, but everyone in the film has got stuff to do. The two guys, like Taye Diggs and Nicky Cat, the two guys who are going after them, they could easily be just nameless henchmen. You could easily do a version of that film where it's two, you're probably played by stuntmen, and they never say anything, and they just sort of are good at shooting and stuff. But instead, like Taye Diggs has got like this whole thing with his boss's wife, so he's got that going on. So he's got stuff at stake. Nicky Cat's got this thing where he's got a plan, like he wants to get the money for himself. So, and it's only like they only give like little moments. It's only sort of the odd scene that they don't sort of spend ages explaining this stuff. But I like that all these characters. It's never straightforward. It's never just, oh, he's the bad guy. And I think this is what he was kind of sort of rebelling against, was this sense of like the Star Wars thing, really, of like, well, this person wearing black is the bad guy, and this person wearing white is the good guy, and that's good and evil. And he's like, these people are all kind of degrees of bad, and it's complicated, and they're all kind of after their own things within that. And I think whether it's effective or not, I think that's incredibly hard to do. And I also don't think he's ever really done it since. Like, I think one of the problems with some of the Mission Impossible films is that you don't get so much of a sense of, well, because they're Tom Cruise movies, you don't get so much a sense of everyone else kind of having their own characterization as much. And I do think that there's something to that. There's something sort of like like when you like it's sort of the way it should be done. Like they always say whenever you're writing a bad guy or you're writing they should always have their own personality and their own things that they want and their own kind of plan, and should be going along their own track that's just kind of intersected with this track, rather than feeling like they just happen to turn up and now they want to kill this person. But it's very hard to do with that many characters, to have everyone all operating on their own level. And there's that scene where the sort of James Caan and the dad and all the people are talking and Tay Diggs, and they're all in the room, and there's so much. And James Caan even says it, I think, as he's walking afterwards, and he's talking to the doctor, and he says there was so much going on in that room, you don't even know what's going on. Like,
yeah.
And there's so much that sort of, it is all kind of unsaid stuff, but you can only kind of have that because you know that all these characters have their own plots going on. So yeah, in defense of the number of characters, that's what I would say.
But I will say, my perspective as somebody who viewed this for the first time, we did have to pause it about halfway through, and I kind of looked at Dan and said, I don't know if I'm fully grasping this. This is my take on it. And Dan was like, yeah, no, you're fine. You're overthinking it. So I don't know if the fact that it is quite convoluted in that sense sort of made me feel, it made me doubt myself, like I was missing things. Mm-hmm. So I think that maybe was to its detriment a little bit as a first-time viewer.
Yeah. I mean, what he doesn't do as well, and again deliberately, is he's never explicit. No one ever states what's happening directly, or what they're trying to do. But I mean, with the exception of maybe like Parker and Longbow, when they say what their plan is and they say we need to get this money or whatever. But for the rest of it, there is a lot of stuff. Like all the backstory stuff is mostly like even James Caan being Juliette Lewis's dad is like, as you said, is implied. There's a lot of stuff. There's never a moment where someone says, oh, that's my, like when where he says, oh, that's my daughter, that's why I need to get her back, or like the backstory with, because I think one of the most interesting characters in it is the doctor, and again, like in anything else, would just be a throwaway character, and then they have to get him back because they need, and then it turns out he's massively connected to the whole thing, and again, maybe a bit convoluted in the way that he's so connected to the plot, but you get this sense there's a part, I think, when James Caan sort of threatens him, there's this idea that he's done something back, that he sort of went off to be a doctor in Baltimore, I think, and did something badly wrong, which is not stated. Mm-hmm. And then is trying to make up for that. Like he's trying to redeem himself for this thing that he's done that is bad. But in any other film, they would say what the bad thing is.
It would have been spelled
it would be
out,
like,
yeah.
oh, you remember in Baltimore when you did the thing and you did that, and now you have to make it better. But no, it's just that he's done a bad thing, and that is sort of all you need. So yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's I quite like that. But do I like it because I've listened to Christopher McQuarrie explaining that that's what he was doing? Possibly, because I definitely, when I saw it the first time, did not appreciate it at all. So,
okay.
And my I suppose my overall issue is that like you shouldn't have to listen to a director's commentary to understand the film. But
no.
There've been so many times I can think of lots of other examples where I have done that, where my opinion of something has changed, either sometimes because of something someone else said, like God, I hated, like everyone, well, like most people, I really disliked Last Jedi when I first saw it, and then someone just explained it to me in a different way, and I'm obsessed with that film now. I think it's like incredible, and sometimes it just takes the right person to say, "Well, have you thought about this?" And you go, oh yeah, okay, and I guess it helps if that right person is the director. Then
yeah, nobody better really.
I've only seen The Last Jedi once. No one's said anything to convince me to go and watch it a second time, but maybe you should.
Are you intrigued enough now?
Yeah, a little bit. I think with this film as well, it does reward repeat viewings. It does mean you've got to sit through some things that maybe you don't want to sit through again. But definitely, I think when you know what everyone's doing and you know how it ends, you can enjoy it a little bit more, I think.
I would say even with the problematic stuff, if I were to watch this again now, I would brace myself for it and just be like, well, it's a 25-year-old film. I still enjoy John Hughes movies from the 80s that are hugely problematic now. But, if you view them through the lens of, well, they're a product of their time, let's acknowledge that that's not okay, but it doesn't mean we can't still enjoy the product as a whole. So I think it would be better on a repeat viewing. Yeah,
I definitely think it is better on repeat viewings, or more enjoyable. Maybe you get more from it. I think I have a less of a problem with John Hughes stuff because it's quite obvious to me that there's no malicious intent there. It's more societal and contextual stuff, whereas this just kind of felt like he was just going out of his way to be offensive, or not to necessarily offend someone, but to be shocking. And he, in doing so, did something that I thought was just quite juvenile.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like if the parents said to a kid, "You can't go to a concert," and then the kid locks themselves in a room and turns their music up really loud or something. You know, just like that rebelling. It feels quite angsty to me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on, McHugh. But then he doesn't do it anymore. He doesn't do it in the Mission Impossible movies.
No, I mean, is that like I'm a bit sad about that in a way.
But from what you've said, if this film was sort of his literal response to being asked to be a one-trick pony and repeat the critical success of The Usual Suspects, then this is him being a teenager and going to his room and blasting the music.
Yeah,
that's literally what this is, right? So that makes sense.
I think that's what I've come to like about it even more, because it is like on stuff that I've worked on, like you kind of you come up against it a lot where people just want you to do the thing that works because everyone's done it before. And because the problem with filmmaking is that it costs so much money, so the people who have that money or in control of that money, they want to make sure that they get that money back, and ideally more so. I can really get behind like the anger in it. Also there's this sort of analogy in the film. So his idea was that the baby is the project, so because they take this opportunity to kidnap the baby and the pregnant lady and the baby, and that is sort of how you end up working on stuff, is things just come along and you go right, but then you get really connected to it and you get sort of too involved, and then suddenly you care, but then at the end you end up with this character who you don't really trust. That was this whole thing with the doctor, is there's this character you don't really trust who's responsible for delivering the baby, so suddenly the film is out of their hands. And what I like about the ending is that when Parker and Longbow just end up, they're almost not characters anymore. Like they're almost, and I think they set this up from the beginning, that the film's not really about them, but they get so sidelined by the other characters by the end that they're just like on the floor. They're not even killed. Like they're not even properly. They don't even get a proper ending. They're just kind of left. And I think that is like I can relate to that on sort of, you know, projects that I've worked on that end up getting taken away, and you kind of go, yeah, that is what happens. You work on this stuff and you put like your heart and soul into it, and then suddenly someone else is in charge and they're taking it in a different direction, and you're lying on the floor with your legs all shut up. Like that's sort of, I think that's what his analogy was, and it does work. And again, it's such an obscure niche analogy, and again very childish. It reminds me of when I did, because I did a creative writing masters, and we had to write a short film as a sort of dissertation piece, and the guy who ran the course was like really sort of massively critical. Obviously he was supposed to be because he's a teacher, but I just got so wound up by him that I ended up completely scrapping the film I had written, and I wrote it instead about this writer who is like so annoyed at his agent that he kind of like has a breakdown, and it was a horror film, but ended up being like quite good. But again, I can totally understand, you get to a point where you get so wound up by stuff, creative stuff, I think, where you kind of can't see a way out of it other than the kind of quite juvenile, like, well, fuck you then, I'm writing this about you. And this is sort of, so I think there's that, I relate to it on that sort of level, I guess, which is not great, but
let's burn the house down. He definitely was he, I don't know if he was in director jail, if that's the term we're using, but he didn't make anything, he didn't direct anything for a long time after this. He kind of worked as a script doctor, didn't he?
What was his next project after this then?
I don't think he's credited, but I'm sure I've heard somewhere that he did some script work on X-Men, which also came out in 2000.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people at his sort of level, they do just get by kind of writing. I think he was, doing sort of uncredited sort of script work or working on projects that just never happen. I mean, I think he could. But I think he really got saved by Bryan Singer. I think when they got, because they did Valkyrie, which isn't a film I love, but I think because of that he gets in touch with. He obviously something clicked with Tom Cruise, and then from then on, he's Tom Cruise's sort of main go-to person. He worked on the script for, what's it? Edge of Tomorrow. It's not called
I
that.
love Edge of Tomorrow.
That one. Yeah. So he worked on that.
Yeah.
He worked on. I think he even did I mean, it's terrible, but I think he even did some work on The Mummy. Like,
okay.
I think Tom Cruise then just sort of pulled him in on anything he was in until you get to now when he's doing the Mission Impossibles and I think all his next sort of 5 projects are all supposed to be all Tom Cruise vehicles. So I think he's sort of.
I looked that up actually, and obviously you've got Dead Reckoning Part 2, which is apparently coming out in 2025
next year. Yeah.
And then there was an untitled Tom Cruise musical.
Oh no!
Which I thought,
no,
I don't want to see that. That sounds horrible. And then there was another untitled Tom Cruise original action film with the potential to be a franchise.
Of course.
But yeah, I saw those 2 projects as well that he's got coming up. But all Tom Cruise stuff, like you say, it's they're
because
so.
They did the Jack Reacher stuff. Like,
Oh yeah.
That's right. He directed that, didn't he, McQuarrie?
Yeah, the first one. Yeah.
He's not a Scientologist as well, is he?
I don't think he's ever said anywhere that he is. I don't know. Who can say? Who can say?
I'm going to side-eye him then, given that we don't know.
Yeah, it's tricky with. I don't know. I mean, Juliette Lewis is a Scientologist, so
I know.
I wonder if she was kind of born into it. I don't want to go on. It's not a Scientology podcast, but I was thinking about that because obviously her father is in this movie, Jeffrey Lewis. And
he's the most relatable character in this film as well. I would also rather shoot myself in the head than answer a phone call.
yeah.
That was his introduction, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I liked that. I thought that was
fun. He wasn't in it enough, actually. That's one of my complaints. I would have liked to see more of his character.
I was really pleased. I'd forgotten that he was in it, and I was very pleased to see him pop up because about a week prior to that, I'd watched Double Impact, and he's really good in that.
And he was in Double Impact.
Uncle Frankie.
I haven't seen that film for years.
It's not great. But it's great if you know what I mean. But yeah, his introduction I really enjoyed because he's got the 6 guns laid out on the table, and he for some reason puts them all in a pillowcase.
Yeah,
like he's trying to.
It's like a raffle.
Yeah,
jumbling them up.
It's which one's loaded. But I really like the way that he doesn't want to answer the phone, and he puts one hand over his ear just as he's trying to take himself out. And then I thought what I thought was interesting as well is that James Caan is calling him, but he's the last person on his list.
Yeah.
He's scratched out 4 other names, I think, above him, and he's the last one. And just a really interesting way to introduce character. But yeah, I agreed. He's not in it enough. I would like to have seen more of him and maybe less of some other stuff. But
yeah. I mean, I think all the stuff with the old people is good.
Yeah, James Caan is amazing.
Every time he's on screen, I'm just like,
yeah,
why don't I watch more James Caan stuff all the time?
Yeah.
Steals the show.
We talked about him in our Thief episode, obviously, quite a lot. Love that movie, and he's brilliant in it.
Mm-hmm.
He has one of my favourite lines in this, actually, where it's something like if you see an old man and he's survived, you know he's a survivor, or something like that.
I wrote that down.
Did you?
Yeah.
It's one of my favourite lines.
Line.
Yeah. There's some really smart pieces of dialogue in this, and I think if you get James Caan to deliver smart dialogue, you just can't go wrong.
Yeah. Apparently he had tactical gun training for Thief that he reused for this film as well.
Right.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. Yeah. No.
Hopefully they cool. Invoice the Thief production company then.
Michael Mann footed the bill.
Yeah, he can afford it.
That's one thing I really did enjoy. I know I talked about this sort of earlier on as well, but I read somewhere that Christopher McQuarrie's, I think, brother was in the military, And so all
yeah.
of the tactical stuff, the gun stuff was sort of as accurate as it possibly could be. And with the exception of the shootout at the end, all of the reloading was pretty accurate. And I don't know, I think that's, for a film like this, I think that's really impressive to go to those sorts of pains. Like for a film that's effectively a fuck you to Hollywood.
Yeah.
I really admire that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point though, that because in that last shootout, it happens all the way through, but particularly in that last shootout, you notice how often Benicio del Toro has to reload.
Yeah.
Like, because he's emptying his I don't really know gun speak, his clip or whatever. Like, it's sort of, and every time, every sort of few seconds, he's got to stop and reload, which eventually is what kind of lets him down. Is because he sort of that's when they get Ryan Phillippe, is when he's reloading. But it's sort of, I think that's really, it doesn't happen enough. I mean, I can't think of another action film where where that even becomes a factor. Most of the time you just accept that the guns are unlimited ammo.
Yeah. Well, considering like our first show was on Hard Boiled, and like John Woo really does say F you to any sort of realism in terms of that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, for a neo-Western, it makes so much more sense to have it be a bit more grounded. Even in a film as ludicrous as this. I don't know, it did really help. And that final shootout as well. Like,
that final shootout is amazing, isn't it?
When it goes full Western.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into whether or not it's a neo-Western, right?
Yeah. I mean, well, so it's sort of part noir, part Western, to me anyway. Like, that's what I kept thinking throughout this, was there are so many elements of noir.
Yeah. There's a couple of the Western bits that really stand out. There's some of the dialogue, because James Caan has this thing about when he says goodbye to people, he says until that day, which is like basically until the day that someone shoots you. So you run out of luck. And it really reminded me, there's a line that I've always liked. I'm going to mess this up, but it's in Gunfight at the OK Corral, the Burt Lancaster version, and there's I think, and I'll probably get this wrong and someone complain, but I'm sure he's talking to Dennis Hopper, because Dennis Hopper's like very young in that film, and Burt Lancaster's White Earp, and he's sort of trying to talk Dennis Hopper's character out of being part of this gang, and he says that somewhere out there's always someone who's faster on the draw than you are, and the more you use a gun, the more likely you are to run into that man. And it had a sort of similar kind of parallel, like this idea that the way of the gun, like if you keep going down, you walk on this path, at some point someone's going to get you, and that felt very Western. And then there was also that bit where Benicio del Toro is, where they've kind of pretended that they've abandoned Juliette Lewis, and he's on the top of that ridge with a sniper rifle, and he's kind of shooting at people. He nearly shoots Juliette Lewis a couple of times, and Ryan Phillippe's like, stop, you careful, you're going to shoot her. And he says, if I'm going to miss, I'll miss, but if I want to hit, I'll hit. Like, I know what I'm doing, basically. And it just really reminded me of like James Coburn in Magnificent Seven, who's like that similar character. He's got a similar line about shooting and his sort of aim and things. I think there were like definite moments that kind of felt like they were straight out of a Western. And I think McQuarrie said he was very sort of influenced by John Sturges, and I can see that sort of in there.
Apparently the brothel courtyard at the end, at the final shootout, was the same one that was used in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Right, yes, because is it that Parker and Longbow, they're like Butch Cassidy and Sundance is like their real names, I think.
Names, their names.
So that would make sense. Yeah, and it is very Butch Cassidy, and like and it is. I mean, again, on the commentary, sort of like denies it quite a bit, but it is very Peckinpah, the whole thing. Like, feels very sort of Peckinpah, like the way, especially like shootout at the end. And but again, Peckinpah was like quite famous for, well, quite. You look at a film like The Wild Bunch, and the characters are they're awful people, and it's not as edgelordy as this, and it's not as sort of as explicit, but you certainly get a sense that they're just not nice people. And even in Magnificent Seven, and it's quite sort of, it's got, because of, I guess when it was made, the kind of, it's not, again, the edges are kind of smoothed off, but there's another bit that reminded me of Magnificent Seven, because all the way through Magnificent Seven, they're like Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen kind of talk about how they're just not good people, and there's a younger character in that who wants to be like them, and they just keep saying like, you don't want to be like us. We are not good people. This is awful what we've had to do. And the bit where Juliette Lewis is just trying to get Benicio del Toro to touch her belly to feel the baby, and he says something like, you don't want men like us to touch you. And it just is like, yeah, you really don't. Sort of, but yeah, it's again this constant like, and I prefer that to the opening bits. I prefer that kind of subtle, like, just these reminders that they are awful people, rather than in the dialogue, rather than the explicit, look how awful these people are.
Yeah, it's more mature. It's definitely those bits that have aged a lot better, for sure.
Yeah,
That's the kind of complicated relationship I have with this film, because it's but it's partly masterpiece, I think. Like, just some of it, the way that the dialogue is written, some of the action, the unusual car chase, which I've never seen before.
Apparently a lot of that was Del Toro's idea as well.
Yeah.
Because he'd seen it on episodes of Cops.
Yes.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense of like that McQuarrie was really like, would just let people go, like let people, if people had ideas. I think that's really impressive too, that the sort of was just like there are quite a few bits in the commentary where he was like, oh, we did this whole monologue, but actually we just let the camera roll and we just used the bit at the end of the scene and cut the monologue, because actually everything was said, because the actors are so good. And it's what, like, I've definitely realized that when you kind of write stuff and then you go, oh yeah, actually actors can act stuff, and you don't need loads of lines of clever dialogue to sort of sell an emotion or something. And someone, Juliette Lewis does it by eating a sandwich in this film. Like, you just sort of get so much across just these other moments. But yeah, I think it's great that he was open to people's ideas and things.
Do you think that you need that stuff on the page so that the actors can understand what they need to be conveying, or is it better to have them just have their own idea about it? I suppose it probably depends on what you're trying to achieve
and who you're working with, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, because there's the difference between like film and theatre. Like in theatre, you get everyone together, you've got the play, but then you get everyone together, including the writer, and you workshop it and you rehearse it for months and you kind of see what comes out of it that way. And I think in film, there's never the rehearsals. I know some directors insist on it and some directors do manage to do it, but there's not that rehearsal time. So a lot of these kind of accidental things that come out they come out accidentally on the shoot. And I don't think you realize until, I don't know if it's so that the actors necessarily know. It's more, I think, so the director knows, or so that the people, the crew sort of know. But like, I think actors, like, I think the idea, I don't know, everyone does stuff differently, I suppose, and you hear different approaches and stuff, and some people, like, I think Tom Cruise is someone who just, he'll do the thing on the page and he'll do it once and it'll be perfect and that's it, he'll kind of move on. But I think there's something cool about finding a way into a scene and just letting the actors kind of play with it. And when you're on a budget, and I mean, especially in those days, where you're shooting on film, so you're sort of like bleeding money the whole time. You kind of just to sort of have any kind of time to kind of let people experiment is unheard of. So, or difficult. It comes at an expense. So I think it's quite cool that it's just good that he was able to do that. And I think I don't know if that's still something he's able to do. I would imagine not.
What I've heard about him lately, the way that he approaches the Mission Impossible movies, I think they kind of come up with the huge action scene first, right? Like, you've got obviously Fallout with all of the stuff that happens in that movie from start to finish, and obviously Dead Reckoning with the train. I think they is it Rogue Nation when they're on the side of the plane? I think they kind of come up with these big set pieces first, and I've heard him say that, well, we shoot that and then we find a reason for all of that stuff to happen around it. And that feels, it sounds anxiety inducing, to be quite honest.
I don't know how I feel about that. It sounds a bit cynical.
Do you know what? It sounds this is going to sound. It sounds quite pure to me.
Does it?
Yeah, like when you're making an action film, it kind of is all resting on the huge set pieces. Obviously, there's other stuff. For me, as a viewer, I want the action set pieces. That's the most important thing. It's got to be good, solid action. And then the rest of it, as long as it's decent, that's kind of good enough. So I think if you're starting with that and you're making sure you're nailing that, I don't know, it feels
I disagree.
exciting, but
I disagree.
stressful.
Story matters, even in an action film.
It does matter, but I don't know. For the last few, I didn't love Dead Reckoning as much as Fallout and Rogue Nation.
Yeah.
I do think Dead Reckoning did dip quite a lot for me. But it's still solid. It's still a decent movie and better than your average. It was better than The Beekeeper.
That's a pretty low bar.
I will see it, obviously, but yeah, I don't know. I sort of, I wasn't so keen on. But this is, I liked what I like about Rogue Nation and Fallout is that he uses the team a lot, and in Dead Reckoning, it felt like a Tom Cruise show again, and like it felt like a throwback to Mission Impossible 2, which is the new metal Mission Impossible, the Limp Bizkit Mission Impossible. But it's again that film, like you watch them back to back now. I've been watching them with my son, and when you watch 2, it's like a completely different film because it's just about Tom Cruise, really, and they all kind of are, but it's even more so. And I felt like Dead Reckoning was sort of going back to that a bit. It just didn't seem like anyone else. Like they just kept giving Benji and Luther stuff to do. Anyway, this is a Mission Impossible podcast.
Not enough Rebecca Ferguson. That's always my complaint.
No, oh god, I mean, me and Joel did a whole podcast about this because it annoyed me so much that the film was just about. Even the story was just about the fact that Ethan Hunt can only exist if there's a woman in peril, essentially, and that the film was sort of about him swapping out one woman for another one.
In terms of towards the end of the movie, I think when they were delivering the baby, I think I heard them say that they shot on 27,000 feet of film.
Oh my god!
Which I googled 27,000 feet in miles earlier because I don't know what that is, and it's 5 miles.
Oh wow!
It's insane.
What I guess what I don't know is, I don't know if you Google this as well, is how long is that in duration? Because that's the thing, isn't it? Because it is. I do think that my apart from the stuff we discussed, like I think my main criticism of this film is I do think it's too long. Like there's easily 20 minutes in the middle. Like I think when the sort of kidnapping starts from then until they sort of stop is great, and I love the whole end sequence, but the middle, like it was interesting watching it again after so many years because I was sat there going, oh, I'm loving this is amazing, and then there was a bit where I did check the running time and I was like, oh god, I'm only an hour in. I thought we were coming up to the end and there's still like 50 minutes left, and there's definitely a sort of pacing issue, which I think they acknowledge in the commentary because like Chris McQuarrie keeps saying, oh god, the second act's about 3 hours too long or something. So it's sort of I wonder if maybe they overshot some of it.
It definitely sags a little bit in the middle for me, but you do get, I think that conversation between James Caan and Benicio del Toro is in Act 2, so you do good. Get that, and that is.
Is that when they're in the bar or the diner or wherever it is?
Yeah. And they're talking about police and how police have these. Like, they're talking about the police and how these days they have like the utility belts, and then James Caan's talking about all the words that they use, like ascertain and adjudicate. And then the next scene, because he says, "Oh," and they keep saying adjudicate and stuff. And then the next scene when he's back at the house with the old guy, and then Tay Diggs says adjudicate. It's like, oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
I do think there are like pockets of absolute brilliance in this script.
Definitely.
I think that there are some moments where it sort of feels like a bit of a rejected Tarantino script, I will say, but there are like absolute moments of brilliance.
Yeah, I think around this, like, because when was Reservoir Dogs? I guess was that sort of 92, 93?
Yeah, 92.
Yeah,
maybe a bit later.
So.
Like because I think we were still in that era of like people try like Tarantino wannabes sort of, and weirdly, I don't think Usual Suspects was that, but I do think this feels more like that. Definitely, that moment at the beginning, the rant we talked about, that definitely feels like a Tarantino thing, inspired thing, like
100%.
Yeah, I think that's that sort of definitely an influence, and in the way the sort of criminals are sort of similar, but yeah.
I did. Someone mentioned Heat earlier. I can't remember whether it was you, Sarah, or you, Chris.
In terms of like shootout, you mean?
Well, there's in terms of the way that the coordinated movements after the heist in Heat, similar to this movie, the way that Parker and Longbaugh kind of work together and move as a whole. Also, the coffee, the meeting between Khan and Benicio del Toro felt very De Niro and Pacino. Let's gonna sit down in a cafe and have a chat. Yeah, I thought about that too. And a bunch of 90s. I also thought about Reservoir Dogs, and the reason that I thought of Reservoir Dogs is because everyone is a bad guy in that movie. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I can't remember I remember what happens to Tim Roth, but I don't remember how he got there, let's say. But from my memory of it, nobody's particularly nice in that. And I kind of thought,
no, they're not.
And that's what I thought about this movie. The best character in this, the most altruistic character, I would say, out of a movie full of bad people is Juliette Lewis. It has to be Juliette Lewis. And the Doctor, I would say the Doctor, but he did something in Baltimore. I don't know what, which did bother me. I know you said we don't really need to know, but I was thinking I would really love to know what happened in Baltimore. It's like Budapest in the Avengers. They keep referring to Budapest. What happened in Budapest?
You and I remember Baltimore very differently.
There we go. That's going in the trailer.
I don't know. I think probably like Reservoir Dogs. Obviously, you talked about it before with like Peckinpah and stuff like that. I think Tarantino was sort of the person to kind of propagate this resurgence of the unlikable protagonist and sort of show that they don't have to be likable. They just have to be compelling. They just have to be well written. Yeah. And this definitely sort of follows that.
I think he was, and I think that, like, you think about that scene in Reservoir Dogs, what I always think about it when they're talking about Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth, where they're planning the heist, and Harvey Keitel is just like explaining how you get a sort of, I think it's like how to get the hostages to do what you're saying, but he's explaining it like he's telling someone how a spreadsheet works in an office. Like it's so good, like because it's just normal to them. I think you get and you get that sense with I think with Parker and Longbaugh and this, that this is just their job. But I think that is a Tarantino thing. I mean, again, I think it has some literary history as well. But like that these are just sort of horrible people, but the horrible stuff is just work to them.
You get a little. We haven't really talked about the relationship between Obex and Jeffers? Tay Diggs? Let's say Tay Diggs and Nicky Cat.
Okay, you know I'm terrible with character names.
Yeah, there's you get a kind of sense of their relationship as well. And I kind of, out of all of the characters, I would like, there's a few that I would like to see more from, but I really liked their relationship. They clearly have worked together for a long time. They have very coordinated movements, similar to how Parker and Longbaugh move. But kind of together more than as a unit. I don't know if I'm making sense in that, but
they have sort of more like training in an official capacity.
Yeah, maybe it's there's like a shot where they just hop over that little wall together and it's in sync, and I'm like, yes, this is an action bit, and I love it. And then they move their guns kind of at the same time. And they kind of know when they're running back to the car, there's a very nice bit where they kind of cross and they know who's driving and they know who the passenger is.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed all of that stuff. And it's really, it feels like there's a lot of backstory to these characters that you get in simple movements like that. And that's why I think that this is equally really smart. I love it on some levels. And then a couple of, in another, if they were done slightly differently, they would be minor gripes, but just because that start is so egregious, I'm just like, I think similar to what you said, you've got to do a lot to kind of win you back after that.
Yeah.
But I do think it's
Yeah.
a brilliant movie that with a couple of tweaks would be an absolute, like, one of my top 25 films maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think, it's definitely still one of my favorites, but it's just, watching it now, I'm like, I mean, apart from you, I'm like, I don't think I could, like, I can't go into work and be like, oh, you've got to see, because I just feel like they'd get through the first 10 minutes and stop and then say, what were you trying to get me to watch? Like,
but it'd be even worse if they watched the first 10 minutes and said, I stopped it after the first 10 minutes, but it was brilliant, wasn't it? We can't be friends anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem to be a recommendation that would have to come with a caveat.
Yeah. Just to skip the first 10 minutes and then
yeah,
fine.
A lot of people refer to the violence in the film, and it is quite a violent film, but apparently it was scaled back because they were threatened with an NC-17 rating in the States. So they did actually scale it back from what was originally intended. I kind of want to see that version. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I'd definitely watch that.
I wonder if there's going to be a director's cut of this in another 10 years' time.
No. I want there to be. I want there to be a 30-year anniversary director's cut with director's commentary, with him saying...
with him condemning the F-slurs, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can't... I mean, the violence is like... I guess because the sort of bullet wounds are quite sort of... like... proper, like, bullet wounds, like you used to get sort of like good squibs and stuff. But I don't know, because there is. I guess there's all the sort of baby stuff, but like
I would say that kind of, in terms of gore, if we're going to call it that, that's the only part that really shocked me, was sort of seeing Juliette Lewis on her back with her belly sliced open and a man with both hands inside her, and I'm just like, oh wow, this isn't something you see every day.
Yeah,
shit.
It's shocking. Yeah, and I think what works about it is he doesn't ever linger on it. I think he doesn't linger on it because he said that the effects looked so bad.
Okay,
the prop belly did not look great. So, but I think that plays to its favor. I think if you the fact that he's always kind of, he quickly cuts away from it whenever you see what's going on down there. It's sort of, I think that makes it seem worse than it is.
Yeah. I think if you linger on it too long, maybe you run the risk of people getting a bit desensitized to it. Whereas if you just get glimpses, it's still shocking every time.
Yeah, it's weird to think now. Like that was always used to be the thing, didn't it? That like if particularly in the States, like the filmmakers were worried about getting the NC-17, and that would sort of limit the audience, and now it's like, because the 18 rating doesn't really, you very rarely get an 18 film, and yet you get like really brutal violence in like a 12. Because it's really hard to judge. Like I find as a parent, it's really hard to judge stuff. Like,
I bet.
Like, because you go, oh, it's 12, and always check BBFC, but they'll say like, oh, moderate violence. You go, that could be anything, and then it'll be someone with their eyeball hanging out. And you go, oh my god, what? Like, moderate,
but no nudity.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, yeah, we're still very weird about sex. I think, like, yeah, in terms of ratings, it's always like, yeah. I mean, that's probably the only thing that still gets an 18 is I would imagine strong sex, but it's so it's so messed up.
I just love the notion that the MPAA were just like, scale back the violence a little bit so you can get an R rating, but the first 5 minutes, absolutely fine, no issues.
So weird, yeah.
But I would love to watch a more brutal version of this. But I do think there's the bit that stands out in my mind is when Parker jumps into the fountain where the money is, and the broken bottles are in the bottom, and he has to pull some broken glass out of his arm, and that's a really
that was
nice...
like a saw trap. That was horrendous.
It was. You expect Billy the Puppet to cycle in. Yeah, that was brutal, and also kind of something they found on the shoot, which they mentioned on the commentary, because Ryan Philippe and Benicio del Toro were wearing their jackets.
Mhm.
Benicio del Toro wanted to keep his jacket on because he thought it looked really cool, and it does, to be fair. Ryan Philippe wanted to take off his jacket.
It was too hot.
Because he was too hot. Yeah, that's right. McQuarrie said, well, make sure, obviously, you can't have your jacket on for the entire thing now. And then they decided to basically have him jump into the fountain and injure himself on the glass. He mentioned about the CGI in the commentary. There's not that much CGI in this, apart from the muzzle flash and the changing of the labels on the bottles.
Yeah.
Because apparently they'd got clearances, but when they found out that, I don't know, probably Budweiser or whoever found out that parts of their bottle are going to be inside Ryan Philippe. They were like, no, we're not going to sign off for this.
Yeah.
So they had to CGI out the labels. But yeah, that was, I found that scene to be really quite wincy.
Yeah.
Like the makeup is brilliant in that scene, I think.
I think he plays it really well as well. I love, I mean, firstly, the way he screams when he lands in it, you're like, what happened? Because you don't see it straight away. But then when he's trying to pull the glass out of his arm and he's trying not to vomit, he's like, you see his face, he's like, ugh. It's so good.
And it's fun.
It's like a proper random horror scene in the sort of middle
of it,
so
yeah.
Oh, great.
And it's fun as well. I found that to be quite funny because I think when you see him jump into the fountain and then you hear the scream from outside and then it cuts to him with the glass in his arm, and I found that quite amusing, I must say.
I'll be honest, some of the weird humorous moments kind of threw me. I found it quite I don't want to say tonally inconsistent because they were sort of present throughout, but I was never sure if I was supposed to be laughing. Like, it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. So yeah, I think maybe it's one of those I need to rewatch again and reappraise.
I found the scene, Jeffrey Lewis's death scene, also quite funny.
He was just like, go on then, fuck off.
Yeah. That's also funny where James Caan thinks he's died and tries to get out of the car and then he starts talking again. And it's great. I think that's deliberate. I mean, it's that's very good.
They're both great in that scene because you can kind of see in Caan's eyes that he's... I've got to be somewhere. Like, come on, are you going to die? And like you say, he just says, I just kind of want to be alone. And I thought that was really funny. I loved that bit. Yeah. So for the whole season, I've been trying to justify why each film is a neo-Western. I think some are easier than others. Logan was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Wind River was pretty easy.
Yeah.
Tremors. We haven't recorded yet. Peek behind the curtain. But there's a few that I'm going to struggle with. And while we were watching this, or for the first half, I was sort of struggling, but
then it got to the end and you heard castanets and you were like, it's fine.
Yeah. Oh, the score is amazing. But it definitely is. And the one thing that I've noticed throughout all of the movies that we've covered so far is that there's a tracker in every single one.
Oh, yeah.
Jeffrey Lewis is the tracker in this movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I've seen from all of the movies that we've watched. And
Stephen Merchant, Jeremy Renner,
yeah,
Jeffrey Lewis. Okay. Yeah. Trackers.
So we'll see if that trend continues into any others.
Yeah.
But it definitely fits, I think, within the season. And there's a couple more which I'm going to struggle to explain, but they're down the road, I think. But
yeah, I think that the fact that you've got these sort of classic outlaw characters is the main thing. The Butch and Sundance of it all. The fact that they have stepped outside of society to sort of do their own thing, and that's the thing that really only exists in westerns, I think, and like it, well, certainly is that type of character being centered in a narrative. I think, like that tracks to the sort of western, the outlaw character, and the ending is definitely, the western's always built towards a massive shootout somewhere, and as do lots of other films, but like I think it particularly that it's in a brothel in the desert. It's that definitely feels like a western. I mean, it does feel like the ending of The Wild Bunch. And I think he even said there's a shot where they're walking through an archway that is a direct sort of lift from The Wild Bunch. So yeah, I think it's sort of. So yeah, I think you're fine calling this one a neo-western.
I think so. I think this one's all right. We get a tick for this one, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think this is pretty equal parts masterpiece, equal parts what? But
Yeah.
it's a really solid movie, and I will go back to this probably every couple of years or so. I think maybe you and I should sit down and rewatch it at some point. Might get a bit more from it, maybe. But I think I don't love it as much as I did when I was 16. But when I was 16, I really wasn't getting anything other than the coordinated movements and the gunfights. Yeah. But it is really, really good. And if you're a fan of McQuarrie, I think it's a really interesting one to watch, just to see kind of where he started as a director, anyway.
I was absolutely ready to come and rag on this film today. But chatting about it and hearing both of your perspectives, I am actually quite keen to go back and rewatch it, knowing what to expect. And like I said, I do think there are absolute pockets of brilliance in this. I think I will say Benicio del Toro is excellent, but fuck that guy for smacking the sex worker's ass apropos of nothing.
Yes, that's...
he was
that's
told to do that by McQuarrie.
No, he wasn't. I read that he did it just off his own back and then blamed McQuarrie because the actress was very annoyed.
Right.
Yeah, it feels like something he would do.
Yeah. So that aside, I don't know, problematic stuff aside, it is a very interesting film, and it is one I'm actually kind of keen to rewatch, actually, to go back in knowing what to expect. So I didn't anticipate that.
It'll be interesting to see how it holds up in like another 20 years, because will it, if you watch films from like the sort of 50s now, the problematic stuff there is quite easy to deal with, because you go, oh, it looks so different to now. It's the 1950s. I can deal with some, not all of it, but most of the stuff you just sort of go, oh, that's okay. And will the problematic stuff in this be easier to handle in 20 years time, or will it be even more shocking that this was a film that came out? I don't know.
It could go either way.
It could go, or possibly both ways.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say that you are a huge fan of this film, then, Chris.
Oh yeah, and I still am. Yeah. Obviously with caveats, but I still think there's so much. I like the juvenile kicking at the sort of the Hollywood establishment stuff in it. So I love all that stuff. I like the little subtleties in it. I like this, like, and this is where I sort of start sounding like an old man who's like, oh, films today. But there's something about, and it's probably the films I choose to watch. Like, I do tend to mostly watch like kind of like most of the stuff I watch these days are either like old films or like blockbusters, like the big films, and not really so much of the kind of indie stuff these days, which is to my detriment probably. But I really remember, this is from an era where I was massively into film and like used to watch everything, and just the pacing of it and the kind of like, it has, even though it's like a crime sort of action film, it still has this sort of like late 90s, early 2000s indie aesthetic where it's paced quite slowly. It kind of takes its time. It's got actors doing interesting things. There's something I really miss about that. You kind of like, the fact that there's this, all the CGI is subtle. Like, you're never like, oh, they've put that in. It's all sort of mostly practical, all real locations, and like these weird little places they've found. And so I love there's something that I'll always love about films from this era, that even with whatever they sort of the content is, there's something, I mean, again, it's just nice things, I mean, shot on film that's kind of I don't know. So there's a nostalgia to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. That so I think I'll probably always kind of find something to love in this, even the more dated it gets. So,
it's a weirdly shocking film in places, but it's not. I take this over a Matthew Vaughn film.
Yeah.
I'd take this over a CGI cat being thrown out of a building. Yeah, I don't know why I thought of Matthew Vaughn there, but I don't know. There's some kind of through line there that I'm going to think about, I think, later on tonight.
Okay. That'll keep you awake tonight.
Yeah, I'll be Charlie Day with the whiteboard. Chris, thank you very much for joining us today to talk about The Way of the Gun. It's been It's been a lot of fun. I'm really glad that you came on to talk about this one.
Oh, I really appreciate you having me. It was a good chat. I'm glad, glad we were able to find some interesting stuff to talk about. I'm glad you didn't just hate it, because I did worry at the beginning. I was thinking, oh god, this is quite difficult.
You've got to get past that stuff.
Yeah, I know. I was like, we could just spend like 3 hours just talking about the two bits at the beginning that are awful.
Total non-starter. Shit, hate it.
So I'm glad we kind of were able to talk about some other stuff as well. But
I think it's
it's been really good.
I think you can enjoy this film, but let's
still acknowledge.
Let's acknowledge that this other stuff is not okay, or let's have an opinion on it. Let's talk about it.
I think that's every film, though, released between 95 to 2005. There's always, you watch that stuff now and you're like, oh my God. I was going to show, because my daughter's really into it, she keeps watching these like awful cheerleading films. And so I was going to show her Bring It On, which I remember loving. And then I read a sort of recent retrospective of it about mostly about how homophobic it was, and I was like, oh god, I'd forgotten that completely. And so I think anything from this era is just difficult because of just I don't know, there was society was changing and people didn't quite know how to sort of talk about those things in a way that in a mature way. So yeah, I think it's one thing we are better at doing now, I would hope, in general. I mean, mostly it's still just
comforting, if nothing else, that things have changed enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, thank you for joining us, Chris. All the links will be in the description. If you want to check out Just the Thing podcast, I would highly recommend you listen to that. Every episode you talk about a film and try and get John Carpenter's The Thing into it, which is
genius.
Really, I always I like listening to the episodes anyway, but I'm always like itching to get to like, right, how are you going to do this one? The last one was Captain Ron.
Yeah.
And
yes, it was.
And that's automatically a good movie because it's got Martin Short in it. But I was listening to this thinking, okay, good luck.
I find it's always the ones where it seems impossible that, like, if they're sort of thing adjacent, or if when a couple of times we've done horror films or like anything that's kind of in the same ballpark, it's sort of boring. But when it's like Captain Ron or something, like I really enjoyed when we did Serendipity. It was one of the first episodes we did, with like putting the thing into a romantic comedy was like that. That was a lot of fun. It's one of those things, like, because Joel sort of has said a few times, like, why are we struggling with this gimmick? It was his idea. It's because sometimes it feels like it's really quite tortured to try and get it in. But it's like you just sort of need a reason for that. Mostly we just sort of like chatting about films, and it's quite good to have. It's been interesting to hang it around The Thing. So like we did a season on 1982 films because that was when The Thing came out, and we did, at the moment we're still doing a sort of Kurt Russell season, which has ended up with like us both watching films that we haven't seen before or haven't seen for ages. Like with the next episode I think that's going to come out is on Overboard, which is a very weird film that I remembered liking as a child, and now it's sort of so yeah. I mean that'll be out by the time this comes out, but it's led us down some interesting paths, which has been good.
Awesome.
Yes, honestly, check out Just a Thing. Highly recommend. The other 50% of Just a Thing are coming on next week for our next episode. Joel is coming on to help us chat about Waterworld.
Dreading this.
Which
oh no,
is a neo-western?
Question mark.
Because it's kind of Mad Max, which is kind of a neo-western, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Wet Mad Max.
Wet Mad Max.
Yeah, or as Joel is referring to it as the Wet Kevin movie in our email correspondence.
I'm excited to hear that because I think he's going in with. He's definitely got thoughts.
Oh,
excellent. Good. We look forward.
Yeah.